Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and I've decided to redo my videos, 2 of them, on the tattoo tarot deck comparisons. And I've decided to do it with some modification. There were 8 cards from the one tarot deck that probably will get me in trouble if someone is inclined to get me in trouble. Now, as some of you may remember, I did a comparison video of the 2 decks about, I guess last month. And somebody reported me for indecency. And the thing that hurt the most was that YouTube agreed with them. So I challenged, their decision, and I lost. Which means I have to proceed with caution, which explains why, beginning every new video now, I start out by saying that this channel was never intended for children. The parameters of my settings on YouTube are that it's for adults to watch. If you are afraid of children seeing this, you probably have to do a better job monitoring your child's video habits. And this channel is intended for adults who enjoy tarot content or are interested in learning the art of tarot interpretation. My videos include commentary on a variety of decks and topics. And I include demonstration tarot readings to illustrate ways that the tarot cards might be interpreted. Historically, tarot art might include partial nudity, similar to what may be seen in an art museum. If you are bothered by any aspect of tarot, please be advised that this channel is not intended for you or your children. However, I have made modifications to one of the decks, and on 8 cards, I've put painter's tape on areas of the body that might upset a person. Now, why am I making that concession? Well, I do apologize to the creator of the deck because the deck is beautiful, and I'm sorry that it was necessary to do that. But the other option is not to show the deck, and I want to show the deck because it's a nice deck. So, let me flip the camera. And before I flip the camera, the 2 decks that I'll be showing side by side are the Tattoo Tarot, Art and Intuition, which I believe when I bought it, I think it was a Kickstarter. I think I donated to it, and I wanted to donate to a independent. Sometimes I do. I like to support independent artists. And I think that's what it was. And then the other one, this deck, I think I got it within the past year. Vintage Tattoo Tarot. So both, and I thought I had another tattoo tarot deck, but I don't. I think there's 3, but I only have 2. And why did I want to buy tattoo tarot decks? I don't have any, I have one tattoo that I got on my heel of, I think it was probably my right heel on my foot when I was maybe 13 or 14 years old. There was a neighborhood boy who, at the time, he was my boyfriend and I was his girlfriend. I don't even think we held hands. We just hung out. Knew him all my life. And he wanted to give me a tattoo. He had a needle, a sewing needle, and he had some indigo ink, in the bottle. And he was giving friends tattoos. So I wanted to get the tattoo because I wanted to impress him, or I wanted to be, his girl. But I knew that if my father saw any markings on my body that I'd get a beating. So I instructed him to put it on the heel of my foot where nobody would see it. And what he gave me was a outline of the Woodstock bird from Snoopy, which came to symbolize the Woodstock event in 1969. So the Woodstock event was only a couple years, had only happened a few years prior to me getting this tattoo. That's the only tattoo I have. And after 50 some years, I'm sure it's faded to the point of not even being able to be seen. But I can't say I don't have any tattoos. But at any rate, I thought, you know, a lot of people have tattoos of tarot cards on their bodies. And it makes sense to me that a tattoo artist might not really like putting other art, you know, other people's art on their clients' bodies. And so it makes sense to me that a tattoo artist might create a tattoo cards, you know, so that if somebody says, I want a tattoo card, you know, it makes sense for a tattoo artist, in other words, to have their own catalog of tattoo cards. And I don't know if that's what has occurred with these two decks, but it makes sense because both of the tattoo tattoo decks were created by tattoo artists. Megan Munden is a UK-based illustrator who is a tattoo artist, and Alyssa Wilson is also a tattoo artist. I'm not sure where she lives. Let me check real quick. She lives in Colorado. And before we get into looking at the decks, the Tattoo Tarot Art and Ink and Intuition, I think it has more of a traditional representation of the cards. I mean, it's not like perfectly traditional, exactly traditional, but it's more inclined to be traditional. Plus, I think the color palette of the Ink and Intuition deck is more in keeping with realistic colors that you may end up getting at a tattoo parlor. The Vintage Tattoo deck represents a broader base, broader variety of people. It's more inclusive, so which is what got me in trouble. Okay, so let me flip the camera and I'll start the side-by-side comparison. This will end up being too long, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to probably do a side-by-side comparison of the Triumph cards, and then I will do a separate video that will compare the pip cards side by side. I'm not going to release them both publicly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to release this one that you're watching as a premiere, and then in the comment area or in the descriptive area, I'll provide a link for the pip side-by-side comparison, so that for those of you who are interested in seeing the full decks, that's how you'll have to see it. I'm not going to, so you'll get two videos, but you'll only be able to see the second one if you make it your business to go into the descriptive area and click on the link to watch it. Okay, so let's flip the camera and get started. The packaging of both, they both come in very sturdy boxes. The Tattoo Tarot Ink and Intuition is a little more oversized. It's got a well for the cards, and then the booklet just sits on top on the rim that's on the interior. It's a nice box. The little white book that comes with it, I thought it was stapled, but it's not. It's stitched. Just, sorry if the focus isn't coming in there. Oh, it's just not. There it is. It's stitched. You know, so it's hand sewn or machine sewn, and I think only the Triumph cards are illustrated in the booklet. And the rest, and maybe the court cards might also be illustrated, but the pips themselves are not. There is no inverted meanings or reversed meanings in this booklet. In the Vintage Tattoo Tarot deck, I mentioned the other one had more traditional colors, I think, more traditional tattoo colors. Well, anyway, the packaging is also a very nice box inside and out. It's a little less large. And the book is a very nice book. It's actually, got a binding. It's got a spine. And every card is represented. And it also gives reverse meanings if you are inclined to read reversals. Now, as far as the card stock, they're both oversized and they're both kind of chunky. When I compared it to a Lo Scarabeo deck, like a typical Lo Scarabeo deck, this was about 18 cards thicker. And in this one, I had to go through the entire Triumph order, and then even up until the Two of Swords, which is the first suit that I put in order when I put a deck together. So it's like this much thicker than a traditional tarot deck, and this one is about this much thicker than a traditional tarot deck. The Ink and Intuition deck is a little bit more cardstocky, significant. It's decent card quality. It's maybe a little thicker than I like. It's got a sheen, but it's not highly reflective. I do have a light on because it's a little bit of an overcast day, and this is about as reflective as it gets. This cardstock has kind of like a rose petal feel, so if you're a tactile person, you may find that very satisfying. And you see that there's no reflective at all, no reflective qualities at all, so it's more of a matte finish. Alrighty. So here, as I mentioned, the Ink and Intuition Tattoo Tarot deck seems to be more inclined to be traditional, although I wouldn't say this is a traditional Fool. He doesn't look like he's about to make a mistake, or to do something carelessly. The definition of this Fool kind of just makes me think of a person who's just taken a chance, not even taking a leap, because it doesn't look like he's about to take a leap. So I can't say a leap of faith, but he just looks like he's out on an adventure and he's open to new things, which is an aspect of the Fool. It's not the only aspect, but it is the aspect that this card shows. Here, we have a more traditional in the sense that the Fool is at the precipice, might be careless, might not be noticing that there's a deep fall that they might take. A lovely costume. It almost looks like maybe it could be like black velvet. What's that fabric called? I think I wrote it down. Oh gosh, jacquard, is that what it's called? Yeah, some type of jacquard. I think that's what it's called. I apologize, I'm not remembering it properly. Maybe it's feminine. We don't see too many female Fools. We have a satchel, like we see sometimes. It's not a traditional satchel, but it's a satchel. And, it could be considered a marotte or a marotte. I'm not sure if I'm saying it proper, which pronunciation. But the staff with the Fool's face on it. But here it's more like a face mask. We have a Magician for both. Again, a little bit more traditional, in keeping with traditional tarot art, with a magician in front of the table. In this case, because this is this deck tends to use the modern words for things like the High Priestess and the Hierophant rather than the Pope and female Pope. So it sort of caters in its artistry toward, maybe Rider Waite Smith to some degree. So instead of having like the ball and cup game, like a con man would, or a trickster might have, we have the suits on the table. He has his magic wand, and there is a lemniscate above his head. Here we have what we would consider probably a traditional magician that we would go see perform. So he's like a magician. He also has a lemniscate. And also I forgot to show the backs of the cards. The Ink and Intuition deck is the same up and down, so you don't get a sense of whether the card will be inverted or not. Here you get a sense of whether this way is upright, and if it appears this way, then you'll have an inversion. Here we have the female Pope, known in both decks as the High Priestess. This one's a little bit more traditional. In keeping with being the High Priestess, she has a moon, she's got a book, she's got a crucifix on her neck or a cross. There is a veil, there's a high-backed chair. And here she's got her pomegranates, she's got the columns. We're reminded of the columns, and we have, perhaps these are sprigs of acacia that might be representing the columns. But she also has the moon, she has a scroll, she has a cross. I think there's enough suggested in this deck for us to understand that she's a spiritual woman or an intuitive kind of woman. And I think here, there's no question, we would understand that she's the female Pope. The Empress of both, quite different. In the Ink and Intuition, we have, it's interesting because many times in the older decks, the historic decks, we have chairbacks that look like wings. And so we don't know, what were they, the wingback chairs that were sort of misunderstood and like not really clear how they were drawn, or were they originally, was the Empress originally, did she have wings in some of these French decks? So it's interesting that she's in a chair with a high back and she has wings of her own. And maybe a nod to the eagle of the Empress. And here we have quite a different take on the Empress. Again, because she's a woman, we have the pomegranates, and we have the symbol of Venus. And she looks just as spiritual as the other one. Although traditionally the Empress is a secular ruler, a secular leader, a secular woman of power. But here we might say that she's feminine power. Again, different takes on the Emperor. We have a more traditional Emperor in the Ink and Intuition. He's facing our left, and he's like the Empress before him. He's got the eagle, he's got the staff, he's got an orb. And here, it's quite different. Again, perhaps those are sprigs of acacia. I'm not positive if that's what they are, but we see sprigs of acacia in TDM decks. What appears to be an ankh, his crown, but also the horns of maybe Aries to suggest a warlike nature or an aggressive nature. I think the Pope, as it's known in both of these decks as the Hierophant, is kind of interesting. Here, and remember when the Pope card was created in Italy, and I'm not saying they weren't corrupt, because certainly the papacy was corrupt since the earliest times, but ideally the Pope was supposed to be someone that you would trust and someone that you would seek their counsel, because it would be like a person particularly of moral, if you had moral questions or moral concerns, it would be the person you would want to seek. So we have the acolytes there. Now they could be pilgrims, or they, by the tonsure on their heads, they probably were also religious men who seek the counsel of the Pope. So I think in this depiction, as in other traditional depictions, we get a sense that the Pope's ideal quality, or the ideal reason behind the Pope, would be someone that you could trust or someone to seek counsel from. This one is so interesting because here he's got the chains, and and he's bound by these chains. So rather than showing a meaning of somebody that you might go to for counsel, I think we'd be limited from that. And I think mostly this is showing the aspect of the Hierophant or the Pope as somebody who's strictly orthodox, or somebody who's, got his own, what's the word, strict, ties to orthodox thinking, not necessarily somebody that you'd want to go to, to trust with, a problem. This is somebody who's going to follow the hard line, who's going to be, I can't think of the correct word, but just somebody who's bound to traditional or orthodox thinking rather than somebody you might go to for counsel. Here's the first card in the deck that I had to censor. So I did. I just put painter's tape on it. So here we have, clearly, we would all know that this would be the Lover's card. In, occultist decks, it's not the lover, it's lovers, right? We have Cupid and we have a couple. And here we don't have Cupid, but we have a couple. The Chariot card is interesting. In both decks, in the Ink and Intuition deck, the Chariot is really kicking up dust. I mean, he's not a static chariot. We really get a sense of forward motion, right? The forward activity. And rather than, the static nature of the TDM decks. And here in the Vintage Tattoo Tarot deck, it might almost be mistaken for a knight in a traditional deck. However, in this deck, I don't think the knights have horses, so it would be different than the knights in this particular deck. And it's a woman. We have a woman knight. Excuse me. See, I made that mistake. We have a woman charioteer, which we do see women charioteers in the early Italian decks, because they were maybe, if the decks were created for a wedding, to commemorate a wedding, then a female charioteer might be suggestive of what the woman who is the bride who's entering the family, what virtues that she might be bringing to the family. So it's an interesting, I don't know if it's a nod to Italian decks, but it's an interesting, what's the word, happy accident or happy coincidence if it's not a reference to that. Here we have Justice. Now you'll notice that in the Ink and Intuition deck, she is what I would consider properly numbered as 8. In the Vintage Tarot deck, it has more of it, and it's not fair of me to say the correct association, because after all, if a deck follows in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition, then of course it would have changed the number. So it's correct for what it is. But I put them both in the same order for convenience of viewing them. I think we might clearly be able to identify this card as Justice, because we do see a scale and we do see the Sword of Justice. And here, this is a more traditional representation. In both, the primary feature, I imagine, would be the light of the hermit, the lantern. With the Ink and Intuition deck, we also get the sense that it's an older gentleman, and he's at the pinnacle of his life. Maybe, there's not a whole, number 9 and the hermit, and when he originally was created with the hourglass, there was a sense of time passing, right? It was like, I think he was even called Time. He became hermit when it migrated to other countries, I think specifically France probably. So here we have a sense of both, that there's a little bit of the light of Diogenes looking for a decent, honest man, or that he's available to someone who wants to seek his counsel. This could be a card of counsel, right? And unlike the Fool, who traditionally is on a mountain, he's not about to jump, and if he were to descend the mountain, we know that he knows how, because he's a skilled person. And here we really just have the sense of whatever the lantern might mean to a person. We do have the number 9, so if there were more than one 9 in a spread, we might pick up on the fact that time is passing, or that the passage of time, because 9 could be seen as completion or getting near completion, right? So we do have that. But if we're just counting on the image itself, then, the lantern, the light of the lantern, and whatever that might mean to you in an interpretation. 10, the Wheel of Fortune. I think we would recognize the wheel in either deck. This one has the Incan Intuition deck, as I've mentioned many times, is more traditional. And we see the wheel turning to the left. I always appreciate knowing which way the wheel is turning because it can make a difference. And we see an almost Ouroboros, not quite, but we see a serpent down here, which we don't typically see on the Wheel of Fortune. And here we have 2 snakes, and I would imagine that the wheel is turning where the head is, right? So it's a little bit different, and we have the 4 symbols, I guess it's Aquarius, I guess that's Scorpio, Aries, and Leo, which would be the 4 evangelists, I suppose, representing them. So kind of traditional in that regard. Again, with the number change, we have, here it's not traditional in the sense that usually we have a woman, and I don't think that's a woman. I mean, I guess it could be. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Just a little bit of a muscular girl if it's a woman. But there's a little bit of brute force here, to represent the concept of fortitude or strength. And here, I really like the representation of fortitude in this card because there's no aggression here. It's the ability to face your fears, to accept the fear without fear, if that makes sense. Quite a different take on the Hanged Man. Here we have a more traditional concept of the Hanged One. Someone who is being punished. This is the consequence of their punishment. They're not dead because the original intent was to serve as like a wanted poster or to humiliate or disgrace the family, and you couldn't disgrace them if you couldn't recognize who they are. So they were intentionally drawn originally, what I believe, to be recognized, because that was the whole point, was to disgrace their family. They did something terrible. They were either treasonous or they were crooks or they were thieves or whatever. And here, we have more of a modern day approach, not suggesting punishment for, or not showing humiliation for having committed a crime, but maybe just hanging around, or being suspended, time being delayed. I think in both decks we'd be able to understand the concept of death. In both decks, they label death. They don't just leave it number 13. Here, as I've mentioned several times, we have a traditional death card. The skeleton has a scythe. And here, death, is wearing like an outfit that the spine almost looks like the zipper to her outfit, right? And that it's just kind of very cool. I love this death card. It's very, very cool. Okay, cruising along. We have Temperance. I think very traditional. She's got the wings of virtue, because it is a virtue, to temper something, to lessen the effects of one thing with another. Perhaps a reference to the biblical story of the wedding at Cana, where Christ, he diluted the alcohol to make it last longer, but it is called temperance. And temperance, in the context of when it was understood, when it was created, meant to temper, to lessen the effects of, to lessen the negative effects of alcohol. Not so much to stretch it so that it lasts longer, but to be less toxic. And I think we would all recognize that as the Temperance card. Here, I mentioned it in the other video, which I had to delete, but it really does remind me of the Laugh-In show from the 1960s, where they would open, those of us of a certain age, and I'm showing my age here for sure, there was like a little segment where people would open a door and stick their heads out, and they would say to one another, I need some sugar, or whatever, you know, they would be silly. And that kind of reminds me of what's going on here. But we have one hand from one place, you know, pouring a liquid into the hand of someone else. I think we could probably, it might not be the way we would normally identify temperance, but I think we might recognize this as the temperance card. Here is another card I censored just in case it offended anybody. We have the traditional devil, you know, that we see in so many tarot decks. And here he has those chains, right? That like, and here it's not so much chains of orthodoxy, but chains of like a prison, right? Of being enslaved to the vices. He's got wings, but they're not wings of virtue. These are wings of vice. And so I think the devil, for me, you know, typically represents vices, a lack of virtue. In the earliest Italian decks, we don't see the devil card or the tower card. And it's not, you know, maybe they were there, but they got lost, or maybe they just weren't part of that original deck. So I can't speak on that. But certainly by the 1500s, sometime in the 1500s, certainly by the Rosenwald in the Budapest, there were devil and tower cards. And those were pretty early, you know, decks created for the common folks. They did have devil and tower cards. So if they weren't in the early tarot decks of the Visconti clan, maybe their sensitivities, you know, just didn't want those cards. I can't speak on that, but it's a possibility. But I think we have certainly very traditional in keeping with TDM. Instead of having the acolytes that the Pope might have had, we have minions, right? People who serve this guy rather than people who serve the Pope. And it's interesting that they do seem to have a visual connection, right? Just and I know you're much more sophisticated that you know that, of course. But for those of you who might be joining for the first time and, you know, this might be your first tarot video ever, it's an interesting comparison to make. And they both end in a 5, right? A 5 and a 15. And here, this is more of a, definitely like vices, right? A lack of virtue, of a temptation, right? Temptation kind of aspect of the devil. Here we have the tower. In one, it has a crown that's toppling, people falling. In the other, we have the eye of God. We have a celestial event, as we did in the first one, like lightning, and a tower burning from within and from outside, the source coming from outside. But we don't see people falling here. And bear in mind that the original intent of the Tower card might have always been the celestial event of lightning and thunder. Because in some other cards that are early historic cards, we don't have towers. We have lightning and thunder. And as I mentioned, we didn't see the Tower card in the earliest hand-painted cards. So as I mentioned already, it could have been because the family didn't want those cards in the deck, or they just didn't exist at that stage. But it stands to reason, though, in the early Italian decks, which still preceded other country decks, right? The Rosenwald and the Budapest still precede anything that was happening over in France, for example, that we're aware of. They represented the thunder and, you know, the Tower card with, you know, lightning, a lightning strike. Because let's think it through. If they were trying to represent lightning right? A celestial event. It is the first card before we get into the other celestial cards like the star, the moon, and the sun. It could be seen as the first celestial card in the sequence. What was getting struck most often in Italy? I mean, if we think of the up and coming towns in Italy, they were very proud of their towers. And so when lightning struck, chances were pretty good it was striking their towers, right? Here's another card that I censored. And we have, a more or less traditional Aquarian reference with the star in the background and the figure pouring the water. In this case, both the jugs are going in the body of water. And here, there are 3 streams of water going into the body of water with only 1 foot in it. Here we have the moon card. Oh my goodness. I just love the vintage tarot moon. Isn't that beautiful? It's just such a beautiful card. But in this card, we get a sense of melancholy, right? Which is an aspect of the moon card. But I think, it's an overwhelming nod to the melancholy aspects of the moon. Here we have a more traditional aspect of things happening under cover of night. Forces thwarting the advancement of another. Although here we do see the crustacean breaking through. Traditionally, we don't see that. We see the crustacean being held below. But here, it's coming through. And we also have the 2 towers, which we don't see here. But both of the moon cards can represent what we traditionally will say, things that happen at night. This one might remind you more readily of things that might happen undercover or sneakily, or, because the dogs are thwarting the crustacean in a sense, right? But here we're more reminded of the melancholy that we might not readily be remembering here, or even mental illness. Sometimes, the moon card could suggest that, especially maybe if you have a lot of cards from the suit of cups, and particularly of the court cards of the suit of cups. And then if you see the moon card and you see a lot of water, it could suggest, melancholy or mental illness being part of the equation. Here we have the sun. And I don't think we'd mistake this card for any other card in either deck. Very, very nice cards. Here we have Judgment. Again, the Ink and Intuition deck is a little more traditional in that we have Gabriel blowing his horn. He's got a banner. He's got his wings of virtue. And he's letting the people know it's time to be held accountable for your life. It's time to be held accountable for the way you've lived your life. And here we don't have the individuals rising, but we do have an angel with wings. It's a virtuous individual with two horns and the eye of, I imagine, of God or the universe. And here we have the World card, which I have censored here. This full-figured girl, which I love that she has a full figure, has a body full of tattoos, and I won't zero in on them because I don't want to get too close. The tattoo, the painter's tape that I have almost matches because there's like a design on the painter's tape, but I'm not zeroing in. Here we have a much more traditional world card with a figure in the center of a mandala and the 4 corners represented by the evangelists. Okay, so I'm going to call it a day with this. And as I mentioned, in the descriptive area, if you'd like to see a side-by-side comparison of the pip cards of each deck, that's where that video will go. I really hope you check that out because both of these decks are lovely decks. And I don't like, the fact that I was precluded from showing these decks because most of us are enlightened individuals, and for the stray individual who has an issue with any aspect of tarot, as I've mentioned, this channel is not suited for you. Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, and please be kind. Please.